Making a video solely to discuss a demo is pretty new territory for me, but this one ended up being truly special, so I decided to make a combined analysis and review video of it. By the time this video is published, I'm already enjoying or about to enjoy the final release of Final Fantasy XVI, so you'll likely hear my thoughts on it too eventually. Until then, I want to go over the remarkable quality of the demo, because regardless of how the final game ends up, I don't think there's any debate regarding the effectiveness that this little taste of the experience has had on generating hype. In the early morning of June 12th, the playable demo for this summer's Japanese RPG hit, Final Fantasy XVI, was released on the PlayStation Store. After an aggressive marketing campaign of several months tried to keep the title at the front of video game discourse with numerous trailers, developer presentations and keynotes, and previews for publications and content creators, the only remaining box to check was to allow the consumer base at large to simply try the game for themselves. Marketing had hit a plateau. It was now up to Square to just put a portion of the game into the hands of their prospective customers and let them make a decision on their own. In the last few years or so, demos have started to pop up again, after a long stretch of time where the big publishers seemed to no longer care about the practice. Due in part to the fact that a bad demo that leaves a negative impression could hurt a game's launch sales rather than help. For a certain period, server and beta tests for online games became the norm, but it seems that companies have begun to understand the importance of the demo again when it comes to building hype for single-player games too. Before its demo came out, Final Fantasy XVI was already receiving a substantial amount of hype, especially from both longtime franchise fans who are always on board with all the different ways the mainline series has changed over the years, and the Final Fantasy XIV players who were confident that yoshi-p would never deliver a disappointing experience. Personally, I fall into both categories. As someone who has always supported the franchise's experimental nature, and as someone who adores 14 and has well over 1,000 hours put into it, 16 was always a potential Game of the Year candidate, even before a release year was set. I had that much faith. But therein lies the rub. Die-hard fans like me were basically always going to buy 16. It was a foregone conclusion, even if it somehow did a 180 and ended up mediocre. The real challenge was getting the attention of people who don't consider themselves Final Fantasy fans. The fickle individuals who are not attached to the name and could be pulled toward a new entry, but then repelled even easier when they saw one specific thing that didn't leave a good impression. Previous attempts have been made to appeal to a wider audience before, with 15 being the most recent standout, but sadly, that game ended up being divisive among the older fans, arguably more so than it was attractive to new ones. But I still had faith. I followed Final Fantasy XVI extremely closely since the day it was announced, soaking up as much information as I could, and I saw no reason why it couldn't be a home run. Maybe the hype was blinding me. Maybe my loyalty to yoshi-p as a 14 player was giving me too much false confidence. Even if I was 99% certain 16 would end up great, that last 1% would whisper at me in a mocking tone, telling me I'm placing my bets on the wrong horse. But then, the demo released. To put it briefly and simply, I felt my hype was justified. It was an incredible feeling to witness so many people finally see what I saw in the game during the lead up to the demo's launch. It was like a community-wide epiphany occurred, and I was watching it unfold essentially in real time. Popular streamers with tens of thousands of viewers were singing the demo's praises, expressing confidence that the game was a strong Game of the Year contender, which is not an easy thing to pull off in a year that also has Resident Evil 4, Dead Space, Hi-Fi Rush, Tears of the Kingdom, Street Fighter VI, Diablo 4, and Metroid Prime Remastered, and that's just the games that already came out. Some of those streamers even bought the game on stream the moment the demo finished. On social media, I saw people say they never touched a Final Fantasy game before, but played the demo out of curiosity and pre-ordered after finishing it as well. I saw people who don't even own a PlayStation 5 say that they watched a content creator play it and then bought a PS5 themselves soon after. To say that the demo was a resounding success in hype generation would be understating it. It begs the question, when was the last time a demo this successful? Just this year, Resident Evil 4 had a great demo, and last year, Elden Ring had a network test. But I would argue that those examples are less about generating new hype and more about reaffirming hype that already existed. Many people expected those two games to be home runs, but the Final Fantasy name isn't such a clear-cut sign of quality anymore. 13 and 15 received a slightly mixed reception. 14 took years to gain the reputation it has now, and 7 Remake is a sore spot for the subgroup of fans who wanted a faithful recreation, and not a sequel in disguise. This is even more clear when yoshi-p himself basically says it's up to him and the 16 team to convince people who were burned by 15 to give 16 a chance. And this demo is how he accomplishes that. So let's finally get to the point of the video and discuss what makes the demo so impactful. The obvious answers are right in front of our face: the excellent story and the satisfying combat. Those are the clear reasons as to why the demo works. Case closed, right? But I want to dive into the details. As good as 16 evidently is, there's still a reason why Creative Business Unit 3 picked the content they picked to allow people to experience a taste of the game for free. And that's what we're going to break down here. First, let's discuss the story content. As you probably already know, the demo includes the prologue, the actual beginning 2 hours of the game. Furthermore, you're allowed to save your data so you can continue where you left off when the final product is out. You won't need to play through it again unless you're a glutton for emotional punishment. This is not something unique to Final Fantasy XVI. Plenty of RPGs have gotten demos in the last few years that allow you to do this. The real point of discussion here is why allowing the players to go through the entire prologue is such a crucial decision in this instance, because CBU 3 could have easily let you play through a portion of the game that's all combat and exploration. Instead, they had people play through the first couple hours that are a good 70% cutscenes. If the story weren't so gripping, this would have been a bad decision. But thankfully, the story does grab you and it doesn't let go. The prologue opens explosively with a taste of the popular Icon battles that Square had been marketing really hard. Ifrit and Phoenix engage in a vicious fight, with the player taking brief control of the latter. Considering their associated element, I'm inclined to call this a hot open instead of a cold one. Then we move forward to current time, where an older Clive is seen on a mission with a team of assassins called the Bastards, to third-man a battle between the Dhalmekian Republic and Iron Kingdom. This is where a glimpse of inter-realm politicking is seen between the Republic and Kingdom of Waloed, who have decided to not participate in the battle. An extremely epic set piece begins, where Shiva and Titan engage in battle while we control Clive as he and his small crew attempt to escape the carnage, with the two icons seen in the background. After Clive is knocked unconscious, we're taken to a flashback, where the lion's share of the demo takes place. In the past, we play as 15-year-old Clive, young and happy in Rosaria, living with his brother Joshua and ward Jill. It's quickly established that Clive is Joshua's protector, especially since he was unable to inherit the power of Phoenix despite being the firstborn son of their father, Elwyn, who is much kinder to Clive than their mother, Annabella, who seems to hate Clive for failing to inherit the power of the Icon, considering him worthless. However, the two brothers have a strong bond, and along with Jill, the three seem inseparable. Here in the past is where the combat tutorial takes place, first in a training session with Murdoch, then it continues in a mission given to Clive by his father, which includes a boss fight. In the second half of this flashback, we see Clive interact more with Joshua and Jill, showcasing his close relationship with both of them. Elwyn, Clive, and Joshua leave their home so Joshua can perform a rite as the dominant of Phoenix in preparation for war. Sadly, the castle they're all staying in is attacked by an unknown enemy, and their mission to draw out Joshua's power as the Phoenix ends in tragedy as many Rosarian men are murdered in cold blood, including Elwyn himself. Joshua loses control and fully transforms into Phoenix, but when Clive tries to calm Joshua down, he's suddenly overcome by an unknown entity or power and is forcefully transformed into a second icon of fire, Ifrit. Ifrit goes into a rage and fights Phoenix brutally, ending their confrontation with the horrific murder of Joshua. Strangely enough though, the game suggests that Clive's consciousness is not within Ifrit, and instead he watches his brother killed, helpless to stop it. The morning after, once the chaos has settled, soldiers of Sanbreque arrive to clean up the remains by killing any Rosarian men still alive. They stumble upon a still-breathing Clive, and it's revealed that Annabella, Clive and Joshua's own mother and Elwyn's wife, was a mastermind behind this terrible massacre, the ultimate form of betrayal. At first, she decides to finish Clive off, but changes her mind to give him a more long-lasting and punishing fate, making him serve as a frontline soldier for the Sanbreque army. Then the title drop happens, a second time, but now in a much more explosive way, to punctuate the prologue's devastating climax like a very big, bright period at the end of a bold statement. Essentially, the prologue was absolutely crammed with crucial story and character establishment, as well as just enough important world building to get an idea of the relationship between realms and the general state of affairs. It was like the entire first season of a new fantasy show was expertly condensed into a 2-hour video game. And that's enough time to get players invested in the narrative even though they're not even playing the final product. How many demos get a person so engrossed so quickly that they might shed tears before it's even over? Despite being a simple sneak peek, an appetizer, it felt like a full-course meal. But what really makes the prologue such a good sample of the game is where it ends, immediately after horrible tragedy befalls our main character, and at the hands of his own traitorous family. It's an immense cliffhanger that's extremely difficult to ignore, and it's when the player's hatred for an antagonist is at its peak. It's one thing to pre-order the game because you want the entire rest of the story, it's another to pre-order the game specifically because you want to see a villain receive their comeuppance. I saw some people speculate that Annabella might be Clive's stepmother, but it appears that might not be the case. Annabella being Clive's biological mother makes her far more shallow and malicious than ever. She carried and birthed him, only to discard him like trash the moment it became clear that he didn't inherit the power of Phoenix. And on top of that, she takes any opportunity she can to berate him, even when he's not around. If that's not a villain worthy of scorn, I don't know what is. Generally speaking, all the characters are very well acted, with Ben Starr, the voice actor of Clive, especially showcasing some incredibly powerful emotion at the climax of the demo. The chemistry between every major character interacting with one another was fantastic. It's no question that the prologue portion of this free sample is a narrative powerhouse clearly designed to suck you in and latch its claws into you as quickly as possible. The density of people, locations, and ideas might be overwhelming, but a very smart feature added to the game is active time lore, the in-game encyclopedia that a player can access at any time, even during cutscenes. It's a useful tool for anyone who just wants to take a moment to slow down and reassess things. It's a tiny feature that can make even the densest stories more digestible, and it should honestly be standard for fantasy games with a huge, wide scope. Accessibility doesn't stop there either. When you first start up the demo, you're given numerous options to customize your playthrough in a manner that best suits you, even if you have little to no experience with action games. 16's marketing spared no expense showcasing how explosive and challenging the combat can be, but it doesn't shy away from acknowledging that, as a Final Fantasy game, there's a solid chance that there will be players who simply want to enjoy the story. And considering how amazing the prologue is, why wouldn't they? But the prologue only makes up about 2/3 of what's possible in the demo. The remainder is the Eikonic challenge, which is additional content that takes place several more hours into the game. Unlike the prologue, there's no save data to carry over to the final release. It's an experience that's restricted only to the demo, and for good reason. I've seen some people confused as to why the Eikonic challenge was included at all when the prologue was more than enough to sell damn near everyone on the game. But I think the challenge is added to cover one very specific weakness that the prologue has: a lack of evolved mid-game combat. Because the prologue is the very beginning of the game, players will not get to experience a robust set of mechanics and abilities that the mid-game would be expected to have. When you're playing as young Clive fighting the Morble, your only real offense is your basic air and ground combos, fire, and 2 Phoenix abilities. Now, with some finesse, you can actually do some cool stuff with this limited kit, especially if you master parry timing and canceling. But a person who is slightly more interested in the combat than they are in the story might be a little disappointed by the limited moveset, because it doesn't give them a good idea of what later game battles will truly feel like. They might even believe that this is as complicated as it gets. But in the Eikonic challenge, you have access to 3 sets of icon skills that do very different things. And on top of that, you're able to go into the abilities menu and unlock more or strengthen the ones you already have. Plus, there's harder enemies with more complex attack patterns. Basically, the Eikonic challenge is there for people who might be sold on the narrative, but not totally sold on the gameplay. It's to cover all bases and ensure the demo is representative of all the best aspects of the game. If there's one other piece of the experience missing that the demo could have included, it's a taste of roaming the open or semi-open world. But of course, implementing something like that probably would have been very difficult. Overall, the Final Fantasy XVI demo is an incredible display of how to properly set the tone and expectations for your game, while also helping it place its best foot forward. A demo that gives enough robust narrative content to stand against some other entire games is a hell of an accomplishment. To make the player more emotional about characters they knew for only 2 hours than some of the characters they've known for 20, 30, or more in other titles is nothing to scoff at. With tight but careful pacing, a cast of charismatic characters, an emotionally charged climax, and a cliffhanger that makes you demand more, the game looks like a remarkable, impactful adventure that players need to experience for themselves. And that's just the story. The combat is another major appeal, with flashy effects, reliable responsiveness, satisfying abilities and skills, and wiggle room for a crazy amount of technical depth that only the best players will be able to utilize in their moment-to-moment gameplay. Even if, by some sort of horrible twist of fate, Final Fantasy XVI ends up being disappointing or outright bad, this demo gives such an incredibly positive impression that during the days between its release and the launch of the final product, it truly feels like the game is going to be one of the best ever made. And that's a colossal achievement for a 2-hour sample. Regardless of how the final game ends up being, it's no question that this will go down as one of the best and most effective demos of all time. This concludes my thoughts on the Final Fantasy XVI demo. As I mentioned at the start of the video, I'm likely already playing the final game once this is published, and I do intend to review it, but it's not going to come out immediately. As a big Final Fantasy fan, I do want to savor the experience. When I'm done though, I'll let you know my thoughts. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you around.